any more confusion, but I think one thing that we should keep in the back of our minds is to make sure we don't preclude the development with golf cart capability and some other transportation. I'm not saying that should be required in here, but make sure that the UDO doesn't preclude.
So making the traffic pass big enough, is that what you're saying?
That would relate to the dimensional.
Can't use the roads. Might not fit on the sidewalk. Golf cart.
Just for tonight's process, whatever, I would suggest whatever you, however far we get tonight, Harry can send this out as a compiled package, and you'll get to look at it between tonight and 2 weeks from tonight.
So Carrie, what's an example of where it's not appropriate? Just throw
For
something out there.
bicycle modality, Jason, you could probably come up with a quicker example than I could. Is it appropriate to have commercial, inside a commercial development, to have bike lanes and not just sidewalks within the confines of a commercial development?
I think you can't, I think you need to, if you're delivering, you know, families and other bike users to a commercial district, you need to make sure that there's a safe way for them to pass through.
Okay.
That doesn't mean there needs to be a separate lane or something, but they can reach the bike parking. And it does say that, something like that.
Something other than a fence that stops them from, you know.
Something other,
I
what?
mean, you wouldn't want the, a fence to be a barrier.
It's not even that dramatic, it's often just forgotten. And
Okay.
so suddenly
Has to be
you're
thought.
dropped into a commercial district, a commercial zone where it's dangerous to move through.
From previous professional experience, there may also be wetlands or steep ravines,
That's what's hurt.
perennial streams, and the connectivity.
Those are obvious.
If we're including opportunities, maybe it goes without saying that we're including opportunities wherever it's all the time. It's just an opportunity. It might be a bike rack here, it might be a bike lane there. Does that make sense, Jason?
When we said feasible, I was just thinking of the outside cases where it wouldn't make sense for a developer to have to build some massive infrastructure across a wetland necessarily or something big ravine, right?
Right.
Not so much. I think your other passages have already asked to strengthen language within, that's a different section. Right, within commercial,
I think so.
that's policy 2.6.
Is when feasible still appropriate then?
I think it is, does anybody object to that?
No, I don't.
Not that you can reject.
Is that right?
You can be sure that Jason will be roped into helping review this section that we're.
Okay. Could we scroll to the next then? Are you ready to move to the next one?
So we touched on the golf cart thing, and there's a new thing coming from DOT. It's kind of odd. They call it a low-speed vehicle, and I think we're going to start seeing a few more of these. Anytime the speed limit's under 35, they're going to allow these on the road if they've got the proper tags, insurance, what have you. And so that's not really something the town's done. That's something NCDOT's done. And so I heard golf carts, and then I also heard somebody say that, well, they can't be on the road. This is a low-speed vehicle is basically a golf cart with a tag.
Oh, yeah, it's a
and-
streetcar.
Yeah, that's all it is. So I do think we need to keep that in mind.
When I see this, I mean that we include golf cart crossings. There's just make sure to consider that modality as well, when it's not, when they're not on the road. And there may be more considerations there that I would still have to study and become familiar with. So for instance, crossings.
Right, and there may be developments that have provision for golf carts, that are not street cars.
Right.
And DOT's, the way they're framing it, they'll allow you to cross a road over 35,
Right.
just to cross it. So we can see that too.
manufacturer right here in Summerfield.
Right.
This next green refers to opportunities within open space areas. Okay. The next one, revise definitions to be inclusive of multimodal transport, not just walkways, but to include, if I read the comment, bicycling or biking.
Some of the definitions were too specific, and I think that
Okay.
was the.
And this again is where the planned development, the planned area development district, or ED, comes back up.
Do you want me to copy the comment from the last one? Last area one,
Are there,
To go where?
right here.
Here.
More details.
Yeah, yeah,
in the other one, remember that the language refers to things like density and other features. Are there specific languages that anybody who's looked at this would suggest is appropriate?
There's no requirement in here for.
I think because of, depending upon the size of the acreage you put on, it can be, you could require like lanes along streets if those three are PD. If you're talking about a larger part of land.
It seems like to me that the planned development is a lot more applicable for sidewalks and bikeways and all of that, because you're talking about a much larger area. But like in Summerfield, you require certain things in certain neighborhoods, like in Brookhaven. So you're gonna have to put a sidewalk all the way down Brookhaven, you're gonna come out to 150 and it's gonna die.
Yep.
So you have a bunch of little sidewalks that don't equate to any sort of trail or path or anything like that unless retroactively the town of Summerfield or whoever does that comes back in and puts sidewalks everywhere. So I mean, ultimately, it seems very disjointed to me that we live in a much more rural situation. This is not Cary where we're all connected in such close proximity. You have a bunch of sidewalks to nowhere. So to me, it seems like the planned development is actually the place where it's much more applicable to put these. Because you have, potentially, 100, 600 acres. That to me makes a lot more sense than making everyone, in every little small neighborhood do this. I mean, it's just not feasible to have a bunch of, or at least to me, and I know you have to start somewhere, but a bunch of sidewalks to nowhere, to major thoroughfares.
And I definitely hear what you're saying. I think it becomes an after. So, you can go through Greensboro and see them putting in sidewalks during different places now. You can, sometimes it takes time to do those things. I agree, I think there might be ways to do conversation around what happens within a neighborhood, but for me, I think it would be neat that new neighborhoods, at least along the roadways, find some way to do, whether it's black trail that becomes, so it doesn't, it's not just a big white sidewalk. We have to define it, that's the zoning board to figure that out. But I think you start a trailway, or you start a sidewalk that starts to bring the community together, so that, because if we had sidewalks at Summerfield, and I live at the corner of Summerfield, and all this, obviously this is all good 10 years down the road, but I could walk out of my neighborhood, get on a sidewalk, I could walk along Pleasant Ridge Road and potentially go down to a business district that was along Summerfield Road. So that's where I say we don't figure out how to make it somewhat mandatory. And I agree, I think what you just brought up makes a lot of sense.
First sentence.
But I think if we don't start it somewhere, come up with some kind of definition to make them start happening, then we know it's not going to happen. So I agree with what you're saying. I think there's a lot of great points in there.
I mean, retroactively, you're talking about people's properties and easements and stuff like that. And I know Jason's a big bike rider. I hurt myself if I tried to do it, but I mean, you've got, sidewalk and side of the road and then sidewalk and side of the road. I just, it's just.
Yeah, it's
Well,
something
we
that we've been
started-
grappling with Trails and Open Space Committee is, and one of the ways we're looking at it is certainly you wouldn't go and man the existing neighborhoods. You don't do that stuff. So how do we create connection between neighborhoods where the streets are safe enough and the speed limits are low enough that once you get into that neighborhood, you use the street, it lowers the cost of connectivity for the community as a whole. But I do agree with Deb that we do need to start somewhere, and I think in much the same way that when new neighborhoods are put in, we ask for stub roads with the forethought that there probably will be another development there at some point, and so then there is that vehicular connectivity. And I think it's also not just neighborhood to neighborhood, but also ensuring that there's connectivity to something that's called out, the easements for utility easements, that there's connection to those, which then can serve as sort of a backbone, is how it's called out in the comp plan, and waterways, watershed, trails, that sort of thing. So I think it's more about the connectivity than, I think you're right, you can't just, we probably shouldn't be forcing every developer to put a sidewalk down every single street. But how do we?
The mechanism for that is to require easements for later.
Exactly.
And we've been doing that, Summerfield Road, for instance, requires sidewalk right now, but we have, every time we approve a new development on Summerfield Road, they're to dedicate an easement to the public for future sidewalk, and they have to build it for their property. So instead of having bits of unconnected sidewalks, we have the opportunity there, it's an opportunity to require connectivity, it's an easement, right? Because we did that. And we've got to write that into the code better, because we came up with it on the fly.
Does that recommendation need to be in our language here, or is this sufficient for zoning to take and say, oh,
The opportunity is what it means that it's not always opportune, just looking for opportunities that make sense.
no, I mean the requirement doesn't necessarily require them to put in sidewalks.
But I think the
It
easement
might
requirement
require
the easement requirement should be a requirement, because you can't go back and get it after property sold. So if you got the easement, you can put it in 50 years from now if you want to.
So let me ask you to that point, though, because what your point is, what we're all talking about. If you get the easement, which is great, but it can go back and it could be 50 years from now, then how does it ever begin? So if you create an easement, which is great, and maybe it's in the front of the neighborhood, so to your point, so you don't have a bunch of sidewalks anywhere. Maybe it's at the entrance of the neighborhoods or along the street or major streetways you have so then it starts to hopefully connect. I don't know, I'm just trying to.
You're trying to solve it.
I'm trying to solve it, and I know, maybe not.
I mean, there are a lot of areas in Greensboro that have been built up for 50 years that don't have sidewalks.
Yeah,
I
no, I
mean, there's a
know.
whole West Ridge Valley, none of them have sidewalks.
Yeah.
I run part of the Bicentennial, and we run a whole sections that are still just roads that the city hasn't bought up. We just have a big sign that says Bicentennial Trail, but it's really just through the neighborhood to
Right.
pick the trail back up again.
Do all of our newer neighborhoods have sidewalks
No.
No.
None of them.
within Summerfield?
Neither does any roads.
So what,
There are arguments that's correct.
We don't
What
currently
doesn't?
require it for all.
so what doesn't have sidewalk, what of the neighborhoods? Vincent Forest, Hinson Farms, Vineyards, they all have sidewalks, right?
None of them has some bars.
Armfield.
We have
Bars
sidewalks,
and
Armfield has
does.
sidewalks.
But they're not on the road, they're,
I
In
don't
the
know.
neighborhood.
So then they're in the neighborhood.
I could just see where a neighborhood wants to be connected within the neighborhood, I mean, that's.
Right,
To their
that
clubhouse.
makes sense, but trying to connect
So
the whole
sidewalks
town of
within.
Summerfield with sidewalks is a little,
But this
That's
is
not
all
what this
new
is
development.
suggesting.
This is not retro, this is all, it all says new public, new, they're all new.
within the neighborhood, it would be a good idea to require sidewalks, because people are gonna walk to most neighborhoods will have a pool, and the kids, and a clubhouse, or whatever, and they keep the kids off the road, that'd be best.
Unless you're Armfield and they come all the way around
Right.
Brookbank.
Across the highway.
With the new CBU requirements too, that sidewalk would be useful.
Are there other
Can I put this?
suggestions?
Easements and
opportunities.
stubs are some of the ways to do it. where the sidewalk has to stub to the adjacent development for future development, just like a road does.
Does that capture the gist of what you all were both suggesting and concerned about? Let's see what the next,
Okay, I can put that down. I had gone back again, actually. So we had talked about whether to use
Any-
the same language.
any
here.
further thoughts on the planned area development and sidewalks, non-vehicular?
Shall I, do I put this language in this square? Or leave it as it is?
It's not my call, but the density criteria are relevant when it comes to trails and bike paths.
Probably the one above it would work fine there. I mean, really, there's just nothing, there's nothing in the, we're not trying to fix anything because there's nothing in here about it.
Right.
So
Talking
what
about
you
the
have,
top of
what you have, what you wrote on the section above,
it. The very top
scroll
of
back up,
Yeah.
keep going.
Yep.
That one right there probably works.
So it
right
applies
there.
that, your suggestion, Bob, apply that also to the PD.
Yeah.
I like that.
It's less typing. for you.
Yes.
Copy
but
paste.
that's
Copy and paste.
Okay. What is the, review all UDO for new references? That's,
Is that cool?
Yep. Use multimodal transportation plan as a criteria for determining the minimum requirements and connectivity.
Use a multimodal.
A multi-use. So, I'm not trying to solve the problem, but if it's not in the multimodal plan, it will be, the administrator, whoever is the administrator, would not be able to require it. It's
And that,
easier
I
if
think that
it's in the
speaks to your concern too, Priscilla, is if the multimodal plan, isn't requiring it. That multimodal plan is not gonna try to connect the whole town, it'll be practical.
So we have
wording
5
now
minutes.
is create and use a multimodal transportation plan as criteria for determining minimum requirements. Andrew, we have 5 minutes. Okay. Any suggested other wording for that policy? Let's see if we can go to that. Update all multimodal standards for the industry's best practices.
That's Jason's.
Okay with that? Let's see what this revised language for easement opportunities for utilities, drainage, to encourage, again, as appropriate, multimodal transportation opportunities.
So another area where we take out that it's required.
Encourage or require?
Yeah, I think it should be required as appropriate.
This is to require as appropriate multimodal. It strengthens whoever is administering the hand of that administrator, or the team.
Shall I put when feasible at the end as we did for him,
Yeah.
Okay.
rather than the as appropriate?
Okay, let's see where we are and if we can
Still, with the feasible, that still kind of leaves it still a little vague as far as whether
feasible.
it's gonna go. I mean, appropriate or feasible, I mean,
Well,
there's.
maybe Duke won't allow it,
Dude,
Power won't allow it.
the sidewalk?
Yeah, maybe they won't allow an easement under their power line.
Well, maybe it's like Amber said with the shall and should, and then,
Well,
that you make it strong and then there's a variance.
The power line easement doesn't give the power line company the right to do anything they want. It only gives them the right to the power line. The property is owned by somebody else.
That's true, that's true.
So, you know,
Yeah, I agree, I don't like that out of feasible.
Yeah.
Because I feel
When
like if
feasible,
then it's just not gonna get done.
And is there
It's
a
not-
note
it's a
about
little
who's
bit.
gonna maintain it? It's homeowners association, I
Homeowners
assume.
association.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I think we're all, we're
Is that
at,
then
where are
required
we
that
in
every neighborhood has to have a
areas
homeowners
relative to
association?
the,
Well, there basically is now.
which policy area are we
Well,
in?
most of them are
And Bob,
required.
if you could note for the minutes that
You're
we,
not required to have one if you put it in the neighborhood.
which one?
Two point
Right now.
four.
But most of them
We
do.
completed 2.4.
If they have any.
It's the way to
amenities,
shift
they're gonna have
responsibility.
Yeah.
So therefore, do you need to
Okay.
require that if that's who's gonna maintain it?
But they expire in 20 years,
That is part of this discussion.
Was that?
unless everybody, that's 75% free.
That's awesome.
So you'll see,
I took when feasible off.
see the revised language, receive it, and at the next meeting, presumably we'll start where we picked up, or where we left off. And I would hope have an opportunity to approve the whole package for policy area 2.
Yeah.
To approve the draft recommendations of